Hey guys, so this is a continuation of my series on composition. I have my part one, if you haven't listened to it, that talks about some of the basic ideas around composition. But for this one, and because someone requested some more composition demos, that I thought I'd talk about this painting that my mother-in-law has. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at it. We're going to find, I think, about 5 things that we might change to help make the composition flow a bit better. I don't know the artist. It's just on my mother-in-law's wall. I think she bought it a few decades ago. So there are certainly lovely bits of this painting, but there's a couple things that have always stood out to me for composition, and I thought it'd be a good use case to look at this and think about, what we might consider working a bit better. Okay, so what would be a good idea is for you to pause the video now. Take a good look, or I guess after I say this, take a good look at the painting, or take a photograph of it, or freeze the video. And I think I have a photo of it in the references below. And see if you can identify 5 compositional no-nos, we'll say, on this painting. So pause it now and do that. Okay, and I assume we are back. So let me point out a couple things that I see that might be violating some of the basic rules. So the very first thing, every time I go to my mother-in-law's house, I stand in front of this painting and I look at it, and she thinks I love it, and indeed there are lovely moments of this. But what I am looking at is this part right over here. Did anyone circle that? If you did, what was it that drew your attention here? What was it that you particularly stood out? It looks a bit funny. There's something odd, isn't it? The apple feels like it's floating. And that's because we have a touch of 2 objects. And this is usually something we want to avoid in our compositions because it creates a tension, and particularly in this case, there's a couple touching edges, but in this one, because of the position of the apple, and because this is in fact not 3-dimensional, right? It's only the illusion of 3-dimensionality, that the touching here is not just tension. It also makes it seem like the apple is levitating above the cheese. So artists use overlap to push things back in space. So you can see here, this cheese is overlapping, it's in front of the grapes, as in, I want to be clear, it's the overlap that makes it in front of. This cheese down here is probably literally in front of the apple, but without the actual overlap of the cheese. So imagine the cheese was sort of, it's like this sort of shape, right? It's moved up, all of a sudden then, it's going to read as, my iPad has just been acting very odd. It's like now picking colors that are not in the, not where I'm selecting. I'm running out of space, that's what it is, I talk too much. So by doing that, all of a sudden, I think we can probably agree that the cheese now is appearing as in front of the apple. Okay, so that's one thing. There are a couple other edges that are adding some tension. There is another touching edge. If you haven't noticed that one yet, have a look and pause the video and see if you can find it. Okay, and we're back. So, right back here. This is touching. And we have this sometimes. It might have been exactly like this, right? Rather than a photograph or real life. I think maybe there was a photograph with this setup, right? And the person drew it exactly, as it is. However, it's in the back, and we have this sort of tension point. It's like things are just almost, right? So how do we resolve that? Well, we can make a lost edge, so we can paint these things together into one. And sorry, I think my color picking is going to be all off because you can see it sort of selecting the wrong area. I've actually had to record this video twice because that's how bad my iPad has been acting up. Anyways, so you can, sorry, I just can't pick the color exactly right there, but you can make these kind of paint into each other. Not a great example of it, but you can, the value, the color that's on the side that I cannot seem to select. The color that's on the side here, right? It's the same value as the wine. So if you paint them into each other, then you will not have that issue. The other thing you can do is you can again, have overlap. So bring the donut, even if the donut or whatever this is, probably some French bread that I am not classy enough to know, whatever it is, or it's cheese, bring it in front of the wine then, or push it behind the wine. So use overlap again, overlapping creating distance in the painting, right? But don't have the tension there, especially in an area that, this is not a focal point. This is not something, though I don't know you'd want this in a focal point either, so you want to minimize that. There's also here a touching edge, or not touching, sorry, this is not touching. It's a little bit of tension, and that could be good if this wine glass is a focal point. That actually is fine. However, with glass, I'm going to just point this out here, it's not really a compositional thing. You see the line that is going around here? There's a distinct outline of both the wine glass and the bottle. There is not one lost edge. And I think here, because I'm seeing outline, I'll make a different color here, outline and outline, that it's just, I would like it to be gentler, is what I'm kind of saying. So, and because there's always lost edges in glass, and I would say the two things that sell glass is lost edges and refracting the light differently through the glass, which usually means, by that I mean that the glass itself is either going to be darker and less saturated than the background, or lighter and less saturated usually, I think, than the background. Glass can behave differently depending on the light going through it. Obviously, beaming sunlight through a beautiful glass of milk in the window in the morning is not going to follow these rules, right? But here the artist has gone lighter, but I also don't know that I feel that there's the yellow coming through, right? So usually taking this here and either darkening and desaturating it through the glass and then losing some edges. But this is not a glass tutorial, so let me just talk about here. I don't want to say, oh, I'm like to master glass. I don't think it takes years to master anything, and I probably haven't painted enough glass to do so. But we can see there that, see how there's a lost edge? You can play that up. Maybe you lose it too much and you want to bring it back a little bit. You can kind of work some of that in. But having some lost edges, especially maybe over here, you can try to work that in too. Okay, now I'm just painting glass. This, you can see already how the sharper edge of this glass, not the right color, the sharper edge of this glass here brings the glass forward, but the vase behind recedes due to the softer edges and those lost edges and other factors as well. So I think that's something I would mention. Okay, let's look for something else that might be striking you. Okay, I would say to you that perhaps, and I want to be clear, I'm being a little nitpicky here for the sake of this tutorial, of course, I am sure that I have been guilty of all these things, for sure. Sometimes we paint something and so many times I'm like, oh, I really like this thing, but it's sort of falling off the canvas, This is one of those cases, right? We painted this was the size of it got really close to the canvas, and we're like, whoops, I didn't really want to be this close. This is what I'm looking at particularly here. And maybe you're saying, oh, what's wrong with that? Why, what, things can't be close to the edge of a canvas? Of course, anything can. But when things are just almost touching the edge of the canvas, it's another touch. We're kind of increasing the tension, right? So if I had, imagine it was like this. Again, do you feel the tension? Do you feel how that's tense? It's like a magnet, right? It's like, what? Is that? This is my internal soundtrack of how I feel when things touch the edges of my paintings. So how do we deal with this? Well, probably two ways. One, let it just go. Let it go off. And in fact, letting things, I'm just using a generic color that was just there. Letting things go off the canvas like this can help have the feeling that there's a lot going on and you're just seeing a little zoomed in snippet of what you're looking at. So, that there's nothing wrong with that. It is delightful. I would even say to you that that's quite nice. But sometimes, we have the shape in, and that shape's not going to work. I just can't stretch an apple. Maybe this is cheese, bread, whatever it is. I can stretch the cheese. Maybe people will believe that. But I can't stretch an apple. People are going to think the apple just got liquefied off to the right. Okay, so what do we do in that case? Well, what we should do is look to tone down the contrast near the edge as much as possible so that the difference between here, a very dark shadow, see how dark that is? So we lighten the shadow, that's what I would say. The shadow's far back anyway, so the shadow has room to lighten. We can lighten the shadow and we can essentially darken the shadow side of whatever this cheese slash bread is. I think the more I talk, the more I'm convinced that it's cheesed. But like I said, my colors will be all over the place. So essentially here, well, maybe I'll make this clear, is darken this a bit more, right? Lighten the shadow and let this sort of just fall off so that there's not this massive difference between the two of them. So it's my long-winded way of saying reduce the contrast here and try it again to lose an edge so there's less tension. This whole cheese thing is very, very bright back here. Very, very bright. So what I'm doing right now is like, it's a bit strange. Because this seems to have a light side that's going across the whole thing. Whereas like the apple, that's its terminator there. So anyhow. Okay, so we have not having a tension on the edge of a painting. What's the next thing? Okay. Focal points. A focal point usually occurs, though there are different scenarios. Perhaps you have a black and white painting with like one dot of red color. But, normally a focal point occurs where there is a high contrast. The dark is dark next to the light is light. Like a cup of tea, a very dark inner dark red liquid of the tea, and then the rim of the teacup. Maybe I'll just draw this out in case you're thinking, what is she talking about right now? I have this thing in my head, But the light's coming this way, like in the painting, right? We're going to have light here. We're going to have light on this side. And we're going to have very dark tea here in there. And we have this high contrast. So this would become potentially a very much a focal point in your painting, especially if you were looking down at the tea, right? Like imagine the tea is like more of a circle because you're looking down at it. And a white teacup, and then you have up here that really bright white, maybe even brighter, maybe even cooler, but should not be sketching a teacup now. Anyways, again, sorry, this sort of like, just so you can vision it, coffee cup maybe, right? We have another natural focal point. Okay, so let's think that we roughly agree on that for most circumstances, and of course, every rule is and should and must be broken. That means we have a couple competing focal points here. So my eye goes to the cheese, though I've looked at this painting so much, I'm not sure if it's just because of the apple floating. My eye also goes here. We have a very high contrast. This is, pretty much white. And, down here we have dark. So that's, this is why when we kind of talk about, simplification, like why simplify? When do you do it? I feel like already by just telling you like that's what those things reduce to actually is sort of more pleasing to me. I like that lack of detail there. I can just kind of fixate on that. I'm not really looking at all the blues of the cheese, I'm just looking at those basic silhouettes and shapes and values, grouped values that are made here, and that is creating a very natural focal point. The problem is that if that is a focal point, it's not really in an ideal situation. It's, these are usually the areas for the focal point. And the reason for that is so you can land somewhere and then you can kind of walk around. So you don't usually put here, 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 here as points of interest. So you have multiple points of interest in a painting. I'm going to back up for a little bit of a second here to explain this. So if you have a painting, there are probably a lot of things in the painting, like in my kitchens, right? There are multiple things in the kitchens that I enjoy and I'm eager to paint and to show. So for instance, one might be a fridge, something else might be a teapot, and maybe there's a cup of tea, right? So how do I place them? So the primary focal point, whatever it is of those things, again, usually where I have a very good high contrast, or I can push a high contrast. Maybe there is a contrast, but I really shove the values in both directions to bring in a stronger focal point, because it's up to you, right? So I put that in one of my 1, 2, 3, my rule of thirds, right? This is maybe my cup of tea that has this really high contrast, right? And maybe I'll show that again here. Sorry, I was looking away. So let's imagine I have my little cup of tea right here. Okay, it's there. And it has steam coming up. It is lovely, and it's in a real, okay, great. That comes in. Then over here in the distance, we've got a fridge or a painting on a wall, and then we've got, a little kettle sitting here. But only one of these things is in the focal point, is in my rule of thirds. This. And the reason that we have the rule of thirds is so that when we have our secondary and tertiary focal points in the painting, that they can be in places that navigate you around the painting. So for instance, even looking at this, those are kind of evenly spaced. Maybe it might be nicer to say, this is my focal point, maybe another interest point up there, and then over here, a tertiary interest point that's a little bit almost closer to the edge of the canvas. It's to get your eye to move around the entire painting, but land somewhere that is the highest contrast, that is the focal point of the painting. It's sort of like if you're going to like a festival, you have the main band, and then maybe you're going to go see other things that are on, right? But there's one main act. I don't go to a lot of festivals. I don't know why I chose that situation. I actually really truly hate festivals. I think I feel unproductive. If I could paint at a festival, maybe I would love it. But anyways, I'm sorry. For anyone who loves festivals, like my husband, apologies. Okay, so where was I? Where was I? Okay, that cheese is essentially in not a focal point, is what I'm saying. So if this is the main thing that's pulling you in with the highest contrast, it's not in a place that I can easily place my secondary and tertiary focal points to help move you around. It's not in my rule of thirds. Again, just a general rule, but that's a consideration here. Okay. Other things. We have some competing points of interest, and none of them are particularly in a focal point, though I will say probably this one is the closest. So again, we have something very light. It's lighter than this. See, light against dark, dark. We create high contrast. And obviously the candle is creating a high contrast. I think there was something else as well. The wine bottle, we have, again, lights next to dark darks. And you might be thinking that, like, well, that's how it is, right? But if we had toned down, like, we could make this whole thing back here. I'm just picking, like, some random color, right? If we had just toned down everything in the back, you would push them all back. And also, like, this bread, if I was looking at this in real life, would probably be reflecting onto that plate. You could tone that down. Like, none of these things have to be, even here, you could say, oh, I just didn't desaturate and kind of like lighten everything back there, right? And you don't have to create such a high contrast. You can push those back. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, despite how things may actually be, they are in your control to pull them forward, to push them back, to make them star players, to hand them clarinetist #1 of the band, or to, put them somewhere on triangle. No offense, anyone plays triangle. Lovely instrument. Okay. Other compositional item here is we have this arrow. I'm calling it an arrow. Maybe like, wait, where's the arrow? It's a corkscrew, but it serves as like a line element. And when you have, like, say, like a spoon, right? Not a great spoon, but it's drawing the attention, like the attention follows the length of it, the eye, either way. So you want to make sure that those elements are helping to navigate people. Like maybe if the spoon was here, it would be pushing people between the wine glass and the cheese and navigating around the painting. So this corkscrew, I don't think it's necessarily a bad position. It's just that be aware that it's going to drag the attention to this spot. So if this is your focal point, this is great. Maybe you land here, you go up, you bounce back down to the focal point. I don't know, right? But just be aware that lines create a lot of direction in your painting. Okay, and the very last thing we'll talk about in this painting, if you haven't picked it out yet, is definitely this candle. Now, I did crop this. It's cropped in a little bit. So there's probably about 1 centimeter more canvas to the left, so it's not as touching as you see here. However, we have dark in the background of this painting, essentially, right in the third level in the behind this painting. We have a black next to a white. So like even if I just like this is basically I suppose what is happening, right? We have this. Like abstractly this is what's there. And like imagine, you have this whole painting, right? Like let's just get rid of all this. You can see how much your eye is drawn, of course, right? To the white square. It's only because there's other things out over here, in this area, that your eye gets pulled back. But, imagine that it was just a white square. You'd probably say, hey, that's a pretty weird place to put a white square. Maybe here would be like a nicer place because it doesn't create so much tension. Though honestly, if this was my entire painting, maybe I would want that square towards the edge because that's kind of interesting and sort of falling off the edge. But regardless, it's certainly creating a lot of tension at the edge, right? Okay. So I'm going to do that. So how do we tackle that, right? Because probably this candle was that bright. It's getting light from the left. It's a white candle. How do we go about, painting this if it's creating too much pull? Well, one is definitely don't put the candle there in your composition. That could be definitely one. But the other one is, maybe there's another shadow that's sort of falling across it. Like anything could be happening to this candle, I mean, its light source is going to be from the left. But, it can be as light or as dark as we really want to push it. So let's just go in here and tone this down, right? Like maybe we just say this, like just this whole thing just needs to be toned down. And then I need less contrast. I'm not choosing any particular color here. I need less contrast on the right side so that the shadow side does not have as much contrast with the dark of the cast shadow, right? And then maybe I just simply want to have like, that's not light enough, a little bit of an indication of a light side and maybe a little bit up here. That's, you can see, I feel like that's even too much. I do like the smoke. I think would be interesting is to see how much of this candle, like we're saying the top of the candle, we're showing the divot where the wax melts, we're showing the wick, we're showing a shadow and a light side of the wick. We have a lot of information. I wonder how much we could get away with that this could still read candle. Like, what if we just had that, and then I like the idea of having like the little like the flame, the lit part here, right? Like maybe we just simply have like that, like a little indication, and then that smoke they had was really nice. I feel like probably up here I have darkened it too much, like maybe so that's why painting's so much fun, right? We're just kind of saying like, wait, what do we need? Like what is selling this? Oh, kind of like that. Okay, now that sits back. There's a little tiny bit of red, and there's this lovely smoke that the artist has done that's helping to indicate that this is in fact a candle and that it's burning. And I think that's quite fun. It gives me a lot to do, right? Now we still have a high contrast over here again. So now that the candle is neutralized, we see that we basically have see how dark, like that's sort of again very high contrast. Though I feel like the artist really loved this wine bottle. There was a lot of tension that went into this wine bottle, and so perhaps that was the main focal point. So yeah. Okay, I think that's probably all of the main compositional things that would particularly stand out to me. But, there are many moments of this painting that are very lovely, particularly the grapes, I think, are very pretty, and I'm sure I could not paint grapes that nice. So, but, compositionally, just, a few things that I think is a fun little exercise. And, do this with other paintings, do this with your own, do this with mine, do this with anyone's, and think about the composition that they chose, what you feel is working, what isn't working. Sometimes we have the most beautiful painting in the world, we get to the very end, and unfortunately, I do this all the time. Whoops, I put, didn't really organize my shapes all that well. So, just all about trying to get it as best we can, as many times as we can, I suppose. So, all right. I hope that was helpful. Thanks so much for watching, guys. And do let me know if you have any questions. If you have any requests for any specific videos, that's why I recorded this one. Let me know. Okay? All right. See ya.